5 days after the zombie outbreak, I reached a hydroelectric dam no one else found. I never planned to follow the river. The river found me on day 3, when I crawled out of a drainage culvert with blood crusted under my fingernails and the sound of my neighbor's jaw unhinging still rattling through my skull. That sound, wet cartilage popping like someone cracking a walnut with their teeth. I carried it downstream for 2 days before I found the dam. My name is Marcus Elliott. I was a hydrology technician for Pacific Northwest Energy before the outbreak. 14 years reading flow charts, monitoring turbine pressure, and filing reports nobody read. That career felt meaningless until the world collapsed and I realized I was one of maybe a handful of people alive who understood how hydroelectric infrastructure actually works. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Day 1 started like any Tuesday. I was eating cereal in my apartment in Ridgemont, a small town wedged between foothills and commercial farmland. The emergency alert hit my phone at 6:47 a.m. I remember because I glanced at the time, assuming it was an Amber Alert. The message said to shelter in place. It said nothing about the dead walking. By noon, I could hear screaming from the apartment below mine. Not arguing, screaming. The kind that breaks mid-breath because the throat producing it is being torn open. I locked my door. I pushed my bookshelf against it. I sat on my kitchen floor holding a chef's knife and told myself the police would come. The police never came. By evening, I watched from my 3rd-floor window as Mrs. Harlan from 2B staggered into the parking lot. Her housecoat was soaked crimson from collar to hem. She moved wrong, her gait hitching sideways like her left hip had disconnected from its socket. She stopped beneath the amber glow of a streetlight, and I saw her face. Her lower lip was gone. Just gone. Teeth exposed in a permanent skeletal grin, jaw working open and closed on nothing. That was my first confirmation. Not from the news, which had already gone to static. Not from social media, which was a chaos spiral of contradictions. From Mrs. Harlan, who had brought me banana bread when I moved in 3 years ago, now standing in the parking lot chewing the air with half a face. I stayed in my apartment through day 2. I drank tap water until the pressure dropped to a trickle. I ate everything in my refrigerator that didn't require cooking because the gas had already stopped. I listened to the building die around me. Screams giving way to silence. Silence giving way to shuffling. Shuffling giving way to the soft, persistent thudding of bodies pressing against doors they couldn't figure out how to open. On day 3, I made my decision. The building had maybe a dozen of them inside by then. I could hear them in the stairwell, their feet dragging on concrete like sandpaper on wood. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my hiking pack from the closet, the one I used for weekend trail runs, and filled it with water bottles, protein bars, a first aid kit, a flashlight, my multi-tool, and the knife. I went out the window. 3rd floor to the fire escape to the dumpster lid to the alley. One of them was there, a teenager, maybe 16, wearing a Ridgemont High basketball jersey now painted with dried black fluid. He turned toward me, and I ran. I ran for 6 hours. Through backyards, over chain-link fences, along railroad tracks. I avoided roads because roads had cars, and cars had bodies, and bodies weren't always still. When exhaustion finally dropped me, I crawled into a drainage culvert beneath an overpass and slept with my knife clutched against my chest like a child holding a stuffed animal. When I woke, I heard water. Not a trickle, a current. Moving, steady, alive in a way nothing else around me seemed to be anymore. I followed that sound east through scrub brush and gravel until the Whitmore River appeared below the embankment, gray-green and insistent. And I knew, with the certainty of 14 years reading watershed maps, exactly where that river led. The Whitmore River feeds into the Clement Reservoir, 63 miles upstream from Ridgemont. I'd studied the watershed for over a decade. Every tributary, every seasonal fluctuation, every infrastructure junction was mapped in my memory with professional precision. And at the reservoir's head sat the Clement Hydroelectric Dam, a 1940s-era concrete gravity structure that Pacific Northwest Energy had kept operational through retrofits and prayer. I'd been there twice for inspections, once in 2019 for a turbine assessment, once in 2021 for a seismic review. Both times I'd driven up a single-lane service road that branched off Highway 9 at a junction most people didn't notice. The dam wasn't a tourist destination. It wasn't marked on hiking maps. It generated modest power for rural substations and existed in that bureaucratic shadow where infrastructure hums along without public awareness. That obscurity was now its greatest asset. I followed the river because I understood something most survivors wouldn't think about in those early panic hours. A hydroelectric dam generates electricity independent of the grid's demand. As long as water flows and turbines spin, power exists at the source. The dam had its own systems: lighting, heating, communications equipment, electronic locks. If the structure was intact, it was a fortress that powered itself. But following the river wasn't simple. The banks were overgrown in stretches, forcing me into the tree line where visibility dropped to arm's length. I moved slowly on day 3, conserving energy, eating half a protein bar every few hours, refilling my water bottles from the river after treating them with purification tablets from my first aid kit. I encountered my second infected at mile marker 8. A woman tangled in riverside brush, her legs caught in blackberry brambles. She thrashed toward me as I passed, arms reaching, thorns tearing her skin without reaction. No pain response. Her eyes tracked me with that empty fixation I was beginning to recognize. Not intelligence, not hunger exactly, but a mechanical orientation toward living movement. I gave her a wide berth and kept walking. By afternoon, I found the first sign of other survivors. A campfire, still warm, surrounded by trampled grass and discarded food wrappers. Someone had been here within hours. I studied the site for clues. Boot prints heading northwest, away from the river toward the highway. They'd gone the wrong direction. Toward population, toward density, toward death. I almost called out, almost shouted into the trees hoping they'd hear me. But I stopped myself because I'd already learned something in 3 days that most people wouldn't accept for weeks. Noise is currency, and you spend it carefully or you go bankrupt. I kept following the river. Day 4 brought rain. Cold, persistent, Pacific Northwest rain that turned the riverbank to mud and soaked through my jacket within an hour. I was miserable but moving. The rain had one advantage. It seemed to slow them. The infected I spotted from a distance moved even more erratically in the downpour, stumbling and falling, struggling with the slick terrain in ways that suggested their deteriorating motor function couldn't compensate for environmental variables. I covered 12 miles on day 4. My feet blistered inside wet boots. My calves seized twice from dehydration despite drinking regularly. The protein bars were gone by evening, and I ate handfuls of salmon berries from bushes along the bank, hoping my identification skills from weekend hikes weren't failing me. That night, I slept beneath a highway overpass where the river passed under Route 9. The concrete provided shelter from rain, and the rushing water below masked small sounds. I didn't sleep well. I hadn't since day 1, but I slept enough. When I woke on day 5, the rain had stopped. Morning fog hung over the river like gauze. And through that fog, maybe 2 miles ahead where the valley narrowed between granite ridges, I saw it. A concrete wall, gray-white against the dark timber of the hillside. The Clement Dam. I sat there on the wet gravel for a full minute, just breathing. Not celebrating, not relieved, just breathing. Because reaching it was only the beginning. The service road appeared a quarter mile before the dam face. It branched off from a gravel pullout that was barely distinguishable from the shoulder erosion along Route 9. No signage. Pacific Northwest Energy had removed the public markers years ago after budget cuts eliminated the visitor information program. You had to know the road existed to find it. I turned onto it with my knife in my hand and my pack straps tightened. The road climbed steadily through second-growth timber, switchbacking twice before leveling out along the reservoir's southern bank. The water was still. Fog drifted across its surface in slow spirals. There were no sounds except my boots on gravel and the distant low hum I recognized immediately. Turbines, operating turbines. The dam was running. That hum meant everything. It meant the intake gates hadn't been closed. It meant water was flowing through the penstocks, spinning generators, producing electricity. The infrastructure was functional. Whatever had happened in the lowland cities hadn't reached up here with enough force to shut things down. I approached the dam's crest road, a 2-lane concrete path running along the top of the structure with steel railings on both sides. The upstream face dropped 30 feet to the reservoir surface. The downstream face fell 140 feet to the tailrace pool below, where churning white water proved the turbines were active. The control building sat at the dam's eastern abutment, a 2-story concrete block structure with small reinforced windows and a heavy steel access door. This was the nerve center. Generator controls, gate mechanisms, communications equipment, maintenance shops, and the small residential quarters where rotating staff had once stayed during extended maintenance periods. The door was locked. Not broken, not forced. Locked with the electromagnetic system I remembered from my inspection visits. The keypad beside the door glowed green, indicating power. I stood before it, rain still dripping from my jacket, and typed in the master access code I'd been issued during my 2021 visit. The lock disengaged with a clean mechanical click. I pushed the door open into darkness and called out. No response. I switched on my flashlight and swept the beam through the entrance corridor. Concrete walls, industrial linoleum floor, emergency lighting strips along the ceiling that pulsed with dim amber illumination. The building had power, but the main lighting circuits weren't active, suggesting the automated systems had shifted to conservation mode without human input. I cleared the building room by room. It took 40 minutes. Every door I opened required a breath held, a flashlight beam cutting into shadow, a moment of absolute listening. The maintenance shop, the generator hall overlooking the turbines below, the communications room with its radio equipment and monitoring screens, the small kitchen with its propane stove and pantry, the 4 residential quarters with their narrow beds and metal lockers. Empty, all of it. Whoever had been staffing the dam when the outbreak began had left. Probably fled down the mountain toward their families in Ridgemont or the surrounding towns. They'd locked up behind them, professional instinct, I suppose, even at the end of the world, and headed toward the people they loved. I doubted they'd found them alive. I stood in the control room, surrounded by humming consoles and blinking status lights, and allowed myself one moment of something that wasn't quite hope, but resembled it. The dam was intact. It was producing power. It had food stores in the pantry, canned goods, dried pasta, coffee. It had clean water from the reservoir filtration system. It had walls 2 feet thick and a single access point with an electronic lock. I was alone, yes. Alone in a concrete fortress 63 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a road nobody knew existed, powered by a river that would never stop flowing. I set my pack on the control room floor. I found the main lighting panel and restored interior illumination. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life throughout the building, banishing shadows. Then I sat down in the operator's chair, put my face in my hands, and wept for the first time since Mrs. Harlan's housecoat turned red. I gave myself 1 day to recover. Day 6, if I was counting correctly, I spent eating canned soup heated on the propane stove, drinking filtered water until my headache receded, and systematically inventorying what the dam offered me. The pantry held approximately 6 weeks of food for 1 person. Canned vegetables, canned meats, pasta, rice, instant coffee, powdered milk, cooking oil. Enough to survive, not enough to build a future. The maintenance shop contained tools, wrenches, voltage meters, welding equipment, lubricants, replacement parts for the generators. The communications room had a shortwave radio, though I hadn't tried transmitting yet. The residential quarters offered 4 beds, clean linens sealed in plastic storage, basic hygiene supplies. The dam itself was my real resource. I spent hours in the control room relearning systems I'd only observed during inspections. The Clement Dam ran 3 Francis turbines, each capable of generating 4 megawatts. Currently, 2 were operational. The third had been offline for maintenance when the world ended, its wicket gates sealed. The 2 active turbines were running at reduced capacity with the automated load management system distributing power to nothing, probably. The substations downstream would be feeding lines that connected to dead towns. But locally, the dam had more power than I could ever need. I could run every system in the building simultaneously and barely register on the output capacity. Heating, lighting, water pumping, communications, all of it available at the flip of a switch. The real vulnerability was physical access. The building had 1 primary entrance, the steel door I'd used, and 2 emergency exits, both on the downstream face, accessible only via external catwalks. The crest road was the only vehicle approach, and it terminated at the building with a reinforced gate. Below the dam, the terrain dropped steeply into the tailrace canyon, effectively unclimbable. The upstream face was a sheer concrete wall. The only approach was the single service road. I could seal myself inside, and nothing without hands and higher reasoning could reach me. On day 7, I began making the dam my home. I moved into the residential quarter closest to the control room. I established routines: morning systems check, midday perimeter observation from the crest road, evening meal and radio monitoring. Structure felt essential. Without it, I'd noticed my thoughts spiraling into the drainage culvert, into the sound of Mrs. Harlan's jaw, into wondering whether my sister in Portland had survived. Claire. I hadn't allowed myself to think about Claire directly until day 7. She lived in the Pearl District with her husband David and their daughter Maya, who was 9. Portland was a city of over 600,000 people. The outbreak had started there, or at least the first confirmed reports I'd seen referenced Portland hospitals being overwhelmed before the alerts went out. I couldn't think about that and remain functional. So I filed it behind a mental door labeled Later and focused on what I could control. On day 8, I tried the radio. The shortwave unit was military-grade surplus. Pacific Northwest Energy had installed it for emergency communication during natural disasters when cellular infrastructure might fail. It had range. I powered it up, adjusted frequencies, and listened. Static. Long stretches of empty static punctuated occasionally by fragments. A voice too garbled to understand. A burst of what might have been Morse code, once what sounded like someone crying before the signal dissolved. I transmitted a simple message on multiple frequencies. This is Marcus Elliott at Clement Dam, Whitmore River watershed. I have power, shelter, and supplies. If anyone receives this, respond on this frequency. I repeated it every hour for 3 days. On day 10, someone answered. The voice was female, clear and controlled. Clement Dam, this is Dr. Noor Aydin. I'm at the Whitmore River Ranger Station with 3 others. We've been monitoring your transmission. We're 12 miles downstream from your position. We need help. I sat in the communications chair with the microphone in my hand and felt the first crack in my solitude. A crack that would either save me or destroy everything I'd built. What kind of help? I asked. My voice sounded strange through the microphone, cautious, hoarse from days of silence. Medical supplies, Dr. Aydin replied. Her accent carried traces of something Mediterranean, filtered through American English. One of our group has an infected wound. I'm a physician, but I have nothing to work with. Antibiotics, suturing materials, antiseptic, anything you might have. I glanced at the first aid kit on the control room table. Basic. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, ibuprofen, a small suture kit meant for emergency laceration repair. It wasn't much, but for someone with medical training, it might be enough. I have a basic kit, I said. Nothing extensive. It's more than we have. A pause, then. There's another issue. We're running low on food. The ranger station had emergency supplies, but they were designed for 3 days, not... She stopped herself, recalibrated. We've been rationing, but we're at the end of what's here. The request was clear. They wanted in. I didn't answer immediately. I set the microphone down and walked to the window overlooking the reservoir. The water was mirror flat in the morning calm, reflecting granite ridges and timber in perfect inverted symmetry. 4 people. I had 6 weeks of food for one. Divided by 5, that became less than 2 weeks. My fortress math changed dramatically with additional mouths. But I was also one person trying to maintain a hydroelectric dam that was designed to be operated by a team. Systems needed monitoring. Maintenance needed performing. And if something went wrong, if I was injured, if equipment failed, if a threat appeared that one person couldn't address, I'd die alone in a concrete box. I picked up the microphone. Tell me about your group. Myself, I'm an emergency physician. I was at a rural health clinic when things fell apart. Lena Vasquez, a park ranger, she was already at the station. Her knowledge of this terrain is the only reason we're alive. Thomas Hargrove, retired, former military. He's the one with the infected wound. Machete cut on his forearm, 3 days old, red streaked, and his grandson Caleb, 16 years old. A doctor, a ranger, a wounded military veteran, and a teenager. Each person had potential utility. The doctor was obvious. The ranger knew the surrounding wilderness. The veteran brought combat experience, assuming he survived his wound. The teenager was a variable. Young enough to be resilient, old enough to contribute labor. The road to the dam branches off Route 9 at mile marker 47, I said. There's a gravel pullout on the north side. No sign. Can you make the 12 miles with a wounded man? Lena says we can follow the river. 2 days at Thomas's pace. The infected. What's the density between us? Sparse up here. The population was thin to begin with. Lena and I cleared 6 between the highway and the station, and we've seen maybe 10 more in the tree line over the past week. They seem drawn toward the lowlands. Noise maybe, or population memory. That aligned with my observations. The infected oriented toward stimuli, movement, sound, possibly scent. In unpopulated highlands, there was little to draw them. The river corridor was relatively safe. 2 days, I said. I'll monitor this frequency every 4 hours. Check in when you reach mile marker 47. I'll open the access gate. Thank you, Marcus. The relief in her voice was tangible, even through radio distortion. We'll be careful. Dr. Ayeden. Yes? If anyone in your group is bitten, if anyone is showing signs, I need to know now. Silent. Then, Thomas's wound is from a machete. He cut himself breaking into a supply shed. No bites. No one in this group has been bitten. I'll see you in 2 days. Multahard. I released the transmit button and sat back. The dam hummed around me, steady, indifferent, eternal. I just made a decision that would reshape everything. Whether toward survival or collapse, I couldn't yet know. But I knew solitude was its own form of dying, and I wasn't ready for either kind yet. They arrived on day 12, 2 hours before sunset. I watched them approach on the crest road through binoculars I'd found in the maintenance shop. 4 figures moving in a tight group. Dr. Ayeden in front, a compact woman with dark hair pulled back, moving with the efficient stride of someone accustomed to hospital hallways where speed meant survival. Behind her, a taller woman in ranger green, Lena Vasquez, carrying a hunting rifle with the barrel pointed skyward and her eyes sweeping the tree line. Thomas Hargrove came next, his left arm wrapped in what appeared to be a torn shirt, leaning slightly on a walking stick, his face gray with pain, but his posture refusing full surrender to it. And behind them all, Caleb, lanky, pale, wearing a backpack too large for his frame and watching the world with the wide-eyed hypervigilance of a child who'd seen things no child should catalog. I met them at the gate. The electromagnetic lock released at my keypad input, and the steel barrier swung open on hydraulic arms. Marcus Elliott, I said. Noor Ayeden extended her hand. Her grip was firm, brief, professional. Thank you for this. Lena Vasquez nodded at me, a single acknowledging dip of her chin that communicated both gratitude and assessment. She was sizing me up. I respected that. Thomas didn't offer his hand. His good one was gripping the walking stick, his wounded arm held against his torso. But he met my eyes with a steadiness that his pallor contradicted. Appreciate it, son. Caleb said nothing. He stared past me at the dam building, at the lights visible through the windows, and his expression shifted from exhaustion to something fragile and dangerous. Hope. I led them inside. The reaction was immediate and physical. Noor's shoulders dropped 2 inches as the door sealed behind us. Lena exhaled audibly. Thomas lowered himself onto the corridor bench and closed his eyes. Caleb stood in the center of the hallway, turning slowly, staring at the ceiling lights with the wonder of someone who'd forgotten electricity existed. The building is secure, I explained, walking them through the layout. Single entrance with electronic lock. 2 emergency exits, both sealed. Walls are reinforced concrete, designed to withstand seismic events. The dam generates its own power continuously. We have running water, heating, cooking facilities, and communications. You've been here alone this entire time? Lena asked. Her voice was low, controlled, with a slight southwestern inflection. Since day 5. Anyone else know about this place? No one has responded to my radio transmissions, except Dr. Ayedin. Lena nodded, processing. I could see her running calculations similar to mine. Security implications, supply mathematics, defensive positioning. She was already thinking tactically. I showed Noor to the first aid kit immediately. She examined its contents with efficient hands, separating items into categories I couldn't follow, then turned to Thomas. Sit, let me see it. She unwrapped his arm in the kitchen under fluorescent light while the rest of us watched. The wound was ugly. A 4-inch gash on his forearm, edges red and swollen, the surrounding skin streaked with crimson lines, tracking toward his elbow. Infection, clearly advancing. Cellulitis, Noor said, not looking up. The suture kit won't help. The wound needs to drain, not close. I need the antiseptic, clean bandaging material, and... She paused. Is there a medicine cabinet anywhere? Sometimes facilities like this keep basic antibiotics for staff. I hadn't checked. I'd inventoried food and tools, but hadn't thought to search for medications beyond my own kit. I'll look. It took 20 minutes of searching through storage closets in the operations office before I found a locked cabinet in the bathroom. Inside, a bottle of amoxicillin, a bottle of ibuprofen, hydrocortisone cream, and antacids. The amoxicillin had an expiration date 8 months past, but Noor took it with visible relief. It'll work, she said. Efficacy diminishes but doesn't disappear immediately after expiration. Thomas would survive, and our group of 5 would have to learn to share the weight of these walls. Living with 4 strangers in a concrete building designed for temporary maintenance stays required immediate negotiation. Not formal, nobody sat around a table and drafted bylaws, but practical, organic, sometimes uncomfortable adjustments to how space and resources were shared. The first morning after their arrival, I woke to the sound of someone in the kitchen. Instinct shot adrenaline through me before my conscious mind caught up. It was Lena, making coffee from the powdered stock, moving quietly in the pre-dawn darkness with only the stove's blue flame for light. Couldn't sleep, she said without turning around. I sat at the small table. The quiet bothers you. The opposite. It's too safe. My nervous system doesn't trust it yet. She poured 2 mugs and sat across from me. How long did it take you to stop sleeping with a weapon? I'll let you know when I do. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of shared understanding. Lena Vasquez had been a park ranger for 11 years. Wilderness search and rescue, fire management, wildlife encounters. She'd been at the Whitmore River Station conducting a routine trail assessment when the outbreak reached the region. Her radio had gone first to chatter, then to chaos, then to silence. She'd survived the first week by knowing the land better than anything dead could navigate it. The infected don't climb well, she told me over that first coffee. Steep terrain confuses them. Their motor control degrades with whatever's happening to their nervous system. They can manage flat ground and gentle slopes. But anything requiring coordination, scrambling over rocks, navigating switchbacks, they fail. They fall. Some get back up, some don't. This was useful intelligence. The dam's position at the head of a steep valley meant the surrounding terrain was naturally defensive. Anything approaching from below would have to navigate significant elevation change on deteriorating legs. What about sound? I asked. They respond to it? Strongly. Gunshots bring them from a mile out. I stopped using the rifle after day 3 unless there was no alternative. Lena tapped the hunting knife at her belt. quiet solutions. Noor emerged next, already in physician mode despite having nowhere to practice. She checked Thomas's wound first, then made a systematic assessment of our collective health. Dehydration across the group. Caleb was underweight. Probably had been before the outbreak, but the past 2 weeks had accelerated it. Thomas's blood pressure concerned her, though she had no way to measure it precisely. My blistered feet needed proper treatment. She triaged us like emergency patients and assigned care plans with an authority that nobody questioned. There was something deeply stabilizing about a person who operated from expertise rather than fear. Thomas spent his first days resting. The antibiotics needed time, and his body needed recovery. But even immobilized on a cot, he contributed. He'd served 22 years in the Army. Logistics, not combat, he clarified, though he'd been deployed to 3 conflict zones. His mind organized information into actionable frameworks. "How much food exactly?" he asked me from his cot on day 13. I told him. "So at 5 people, we've got maybe 12 days before things get critical. Less if we're doing physical labor, which burns more calories." "I've been thinking about that." "The river has fish," he said. "The reservoir too. Caleb knows how to fish. I taught him summers at my cabin. And Lena, she'll know what's edible in these woods. We stretch the canned supplies with foraged and caught supplements. We buy ourselves weeks, maybe months." It was obvious in retrospect. But I'd been so focused on the dam's mechanical systems that I'd neglected the biological resources surrounding it. The reservoir was stocked. Pacific Northwest Energy had maintained fish populations for environmental compliance. Trout primarily, supplemented with planted kokanee salmon. The surrounding forest offered seasonal forage, berries, mushrooms, roots. We weren't just sheltering. We could sustain. That realization shifted something fundamental in the group dynamic. We weren't refugees hiding from death. We were the beginning of something that might endure. Caleb spoke for the first time on day 14. Not that he'd been entirely silent. He'd answered direct questions with monosyllables, nodded or shook his head, followed instructions without resistance. But he hadn't initiated conversation, hadn't offered information unasked, hadn't engaged with any of us as a social being rather than a passenger. We were on the Crest Road. I'd assigned myself morning perimeter checks, and Caleb had followed me outside without explanation. He stood at the railing overlooking the reservoir, his hands gripping the steel rail, and said, "My mom turned on day 1. I stopped walking, turned back to him. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the water below, his jaw tight. She came home from work early, said she felt sick, threw up in the bathroom. Grandpa Thomas was at our house helping with the gutters. He told me to stay in my room." Caleb's knuckles whitened on the railing. I heard her fall. Then I heard different sounds. Then Grandpa was at my door telling me to grab my backpack and get in the truck. He had the machete from the garage. There was blood on it. He didn't say what the machete had been used for. He didn't need to. "Your grandfather saved your life," I said. "He killed my mom." The statement hung between us and the mountain air. Not accusation, declaration. A fact Caleb was carrying that weighed more than his oversized backpack. More than the 12 miles he'd walked to reach this dam. More than the 16 years he'd been alive. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't say it wasn't his mother anymore, or she would have wanted him safe, or any of the hollow phrases people deploy against grief they can't touch. I just stood beside him at the railing and let the silence hold what words couldn't. After a while, he said, "Can you teach me about the dam? How it works?" Yeah, I can do that. Grandpa says everyone needs to be useful. Your grandfather's right. But you don't have to earn your place here, Caleb. You understand that? He looked at me then. The first direct eye contact he'd made since arriving. His eyes were brown, rimmed red from insufficient sleep, carrying a decade of aging that 2 weeks had imposed. Everyone has to earn their place everywhere now. That's what this world is. 16 years old and already understanding the new social contract. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to tell him that safety was a right, not a wage. But I couldn't, because he was correct, and lying to him would insult what he'd survived to be standing here. Tomorrow morning, I said. 7 o'clock. I'll show you the generator room. He nodded. Then he walked back inside, and I stood alone on the crest road, watching the reservoir reflect a sky that didn't know civilization had ended beneath it. That afternoon, I found Lena mapping the surrounding terrain on a topographic chart she'd pulled from the ranger station. She'd spread it across the kitchen table and was marking locations with colored pencils. Red for confirmed infected sightings, green for water sources, blue for potential forage areas. You're building an operations map, I said. Old habit. Fire season, we'd map resources, hazards, evacuation routes. Same principles apply. She tapped a ridge to the southwest. This concerns me. There's a campground here, Crystal Lake, about 8 miles out. Seasonal, but popular. If it had occupants when things went south, we might see stragglers, living or otherwise, working their way through the drainage toward the river. Toward us. Possibly. The terrain funnels movement. Valleys are natural corridors. Anything mobile in this watershed will eventually end up river adjacent. She looked at me. We should establish an observation point, somewhere with a sight line down the valley. Early warning. She was right. We'd been thinking of the dam as a sealed box. But sealed boxes become coffins if you don't see the threat before it reaches your door. We established the lookout on day 15. Lena identified a rock outcropping above the dam's western abutment, accessible by a steep but manageable trail, offering a clear line of sight 3 miles down the river valley and across the reservoir's northern shore. We rotated observation shifts, 2 hours each, 4 times daily, with binoculars and the shortwave radio's portable handset for communication. It was during my afternoon shift on day 16 that I first saw movement downstream. Not infected, living people. 2 figures moving along the river's edge, using the same route I'd followed to reach the dam. They moved with purpose and caution, stopping frequently, checking behind them. One carried something long, a rifle or shotgun. I keyed the radio. Lena. Marcus. 2 individuals approaching from downstream, river right, armed, approximately 2 miles out. Her response came immediately. Copy. Coming to your position. She reached me in 4 minutes, barely winded despite the climb. I handed her the binoculars. She studied the figures in silence for 30 seconds. 1 male, 1 female. The man has a shotgun. They're carrying packs, traveling, not fleeing. No visible injuries. She lowered the binoculars. They're following the river. Same logic you used. Heading here? Maybe. Maybe they're just following water upstream, hoping for distance from population centers. She was quiet for a moment. Your radio broadcasts? You said you transmitted for 3 days. The implication landed. If Dr. Aiden had heard me from 12 miles away, anyone with a shortwave receiver within range could have captured my transmission. I'd broadcast our location, our resources, our vulnerability as a single occupant. I stopped transmitting after Noor responded, I said, but the signal was out there. If these 2 have a radio, or if they spoke to someone who did, they might be coming specifically for this dam. We watched them approach for the next hour. They stopped at the same abandoned campfire I'd passed on my own journey, the one with boot prints heading toward the highway. The two figures rested, ate something, then continued upstream, directly towards us. "We have a decision to make," Lena said. "We let Noor and Thomas in. Noor contacted us first. We had communication, assessment, mutual agreement. These two are unknowns approaching an armed position." She paused. "I'm not saying we turn them away. I'm saying we need protocol, rules of engagement." She was right again. The dam's security depended on controlled access. If we opened the gate to everyone who walked up the service road, we'd lose the advantage that made this place survivable. But if we sealed ourselves off entirely, we became something I didn't want to be. Something I'd judge harshly if I encountered it from the outside. We gathered the group in the kitchen. Thomas was sitting upright now, his arm still bandaged, but his color improving with each day of antibiotics and rest. Noor listened with clinical detachment. Caleb stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching the adults negotiate his safety. "Two people approaching," Lena briefed them. "Armed, unknown intentions. They'll reach our position by tomorrow morning if they continue at current pace." "We assessed them the same way you assessed us," Noor said. "Communication first. Determine their condition, their needs, their threat level." Thomas shook his head slowly. A doctor, a ranger, a kid, and an old man with a bad arm. We weren't a threat to anyone. An armed pair, unknown history, unknown motivation. That's different math. "So, what do you suggest?" I asked. "We meet them before they reach the dam. Away from the building, we control the terrain, we control the information. They don't see the facility until we decide they should." Lena nodded. "I agree. Marcus and I intercept them at the service road junction. We talk, we evaluate. We decide together before anyone comes through that gate." I looked at the faces around the table. 5 people who'd known each other less than a week, already navigating the politics of inclusion and exclusion. Already deciding who deserved safety and who would be denied it. This was the weight the walls carried. Not concrete and steel, but the choices made behind them. We intercepted them at dawn on day 17. Lena and I positioned ourselves at the junction where the service road met the gravel pullout, visible but with tree cover behind us for retreat if needed. Lena carried her rifle. I had the multi-tool knife and what I hoped was an expression of calm authority rather than transparent anxiety. They appeared from the river trail at 7:20 a.m. The man was tall, early 40s, wearing a canvas jacket and jeans with a pump-action shotgun cradled across his chest. The woman was younger, late 20s, dark skin, athletic build, carrying a frame backpack with a sleeping bag strapped to the top. They saw us and stopped. 10 seconds of assessment, everyone calculating. The man spoke first. "We're not looking for trouble." His voice was steady, southern inflection. "We heard a radio transmission 5-6 days ago. Someone at a dam with power and supplies. We've been walking toward it since." "You heard the transmission," I said. "How?" "NOAA weather radio is dead. I was scanning frequencies on a handheld unit I grabbed from a sporting goods store. Caught your message, caught the coordinates." He shifted his weight. "I'm Darius Cole. This is Jeanette, my sister." Jeanette raised one hand in a cautious wave, but said nothing. Her eyes moved between Lena's rifle and my face. "You're armed," Lena observed. "Everyone alive is armed," Darius replied, "or they're not alive anymore." "Fair point. Where are you coming from?" I asked. Milford, 30 miles south. Town of 8,000, or it was. By day 3, it was a graveyard, with things still moving in it. His jaw tightened. We got out early. Jeanette's a nurse. She recognized what was happening before the official word came. We gathered what we could and headed uphill. A nurse. The practical part of my brain filed that immediately. Another medical professional was an asset. But the decision wasn't mine alone anymore. We have a small group at the dam, I said. 5 people. Before we discuss access, I need to ask directly. Has either of you been bitten? Any wounds you haven't disclosed? Darius looked at his sister. She shook her head. He turned back. No, clean, both of us. You can check if you need to. I do need to. I gestured toward Lena. My colleague will do a visual assessment. Arms, neck, legs, any exposed skin. Standard precaution. Lena stepped forward, professional and efficient. She examined both of them with a thorough detachment of someone conducting a safety inspection, which was exactly what it was. No bites, no suspicious wounds. A healing scratch on Jeanette's knee from a fall on rocky terrain, clearly mechanical rather than biological. They're clean, Lena confirmed. You mentioned supplies and power, Darius said. We're not asking for charity. I'm a mechanic. 20 years working diesel engines, hydraulic systems, heavy machinery. Whatever you're running up there, I can help maintain it. Jeanette's medical training speaks for itself. He was making his case, offering utility before asking for refuge. The new social contract that even 16-year-old Caleb had already articulated. Everyone earns their place. Wait here, I told them. 20 minutes. Lena and I walked back up the service road out of earshot. She spoke first. They're legitimate. Body language is consistent. No concealment, no deflection. The sister's quiet but not evasive. He's direct. Military bearing maybe, or just someone used to being competent under pressure. A mechanic could be invaluable, I said. The third turbine is offline. If he understands hydraulic systems, I know, the math works. But 7 people means our food window shrinks to 9 days without supplementation. We're already fishing. The forage map is active. We can sustain 7. Lena studied my face. You've already decided, haven't you? She was silent a moment. Then, yeah, I have. But Marcus, this is the last time we do this casually. 7 people is a community. 8 becomes a liability. We need a threshold. I nodded. Agreed. We formalize access protocol today. We walked back to the junction and told Darius and Jeanette they were welcome at Clement Dam. 7 people in a building designed for 4-person rotating crews meant adjustments. We converted the maintenance shop's back office into a 7th sleeping space. Darius and Jeanette took the 2 remaining residential quarters, and the surplus cot went to Caleb, who'd been sleeping on a rolled mattress in the corridor. The dynamic shifted immediately, not badly, but perceptibly. With Noor's group, we'd established equilibrium through necessity and limited numbers. Adding 2 more people introduced new vectors of personality, opinion, and expectation. Darius was a worker. By day 18, he'd already assessed the 3rd turbine's maintenance status, identified the specific issue, a seized wicket gate actuator, and proposed a repair timeline. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent 2 decades solving mechanical problems by touch and instinct. I showed him the dam systems, and he absorbed the information with visible hunger, asking questions that revealed understanding rather than ignorance. This actuator's hydraulic cylinder is locked, he said, standing in the generator hall with grease already on his forearms. Probably a failed seal letting fluid leak past the piston. I can rebuild it if you've got the O-ring kit. I did. The maintenance stores included a comprehensive seal and gasket inventory. Pacific Northwest Energy's one area of reliable preparation. If we get this third turbine online, Darius continued, you've got 12 megawatts total capacity. That's enough to power a small town. We don't have a town. Not yet. He said it matter-of-factly, not as aspiration, but as observation. And the word settled into the room with a weight I wasn't prepared to carry. Jeanette integrated differently. Where Darius was kinetic, always moving, always working. His sister was observational. She spent her first days learning the layout, understanding routines, watching how the group interacted. On day 19, she approached Noor in the kitchen. I'd like to set up a medical station, she said. Proper inventory, sterilization protocol, treatment area. If we're going to sustain a group here, we need infrastructure beyond a first aid kit. Noor's expression brightened for the first time since I'd met her. I've been thinking the same thing. The storage room beside the kitchen. It has running water and good lighting. If we clear it out, I'll clear it this afternoon. They spent the next 2 days building a functional medical space from what the dam offered. Boiled water for sterilization, clean linens cut into bandaging, the remaining antibiotics inventoried and rationed. Noor taught Jeanette suturing techniques she'd learned in emergency medicine. Jeanette shared nursing protocols for wound care and infection monitoring. Watching professionals build systems from nothing was its own form of reassurance. It meant people still believed in futures. But not everyone adapted smoothly. Thomas grew quieter as the group expanded. His wound was healing, Noor confirmed the infection was responding to antibiotics. But his demeanor darkened with each new face. On day 19, he pulled me aside in the corridor. How many more? He asked. His voice was low, not confrontational, but heavy with concern. Lena and I agreed. We're establishing a threshold. What threshold? We haven't defined it yet. He fixed me with a stare refined by 22 years of military service, the kind that communicated volumes without raising its voice. Define it fast, Marcus. Because every person you let through that gate is a mouth to feed, yes, but they're also a potential fracture point. People are predictable in small numbers. In larger groups, politics emerge. Power struggles, factions. I've seen it in every deployment. The moment a unit grows beyond immediate trust relationships, hierarchy becomes contested. You think 7 is already too many? I think 7 is the moment you stop being a group of survivors and start being a society. And societies need governance, not just goodwill. He was right. And the realization sat uncomfortably in my stomach because I'd been operating on instinct and moral impulse, not structural thinking. The dam could sustain bodies. But could it sustain the human complexities that bodies inevitably generated? On day 20, we held our first formal meeting. All 7 of us around the kitchen table, the overhead light casting everyone in the same fluorescent honesty. No shadows to hide in. I hadn't planned to lead it. But everyone looked at me when they sat down. And I understood why. I'd been here first. I controlled the access code. I understood the systems. Default authority by arrival and knowledge, not by election or merit. That distinction mattered, and I named it. I'm not in charge, I said. I found this place because of professional luck. I knew it existed. That doesn't make me a leader. If we're going to make decisions about how we survive here, we make them together. Thomas nodded slowly. Lena leaned back in her chair, watching the others. Darius folded his hands on the table. Nor met my eyes with what I interpreted as approval. First issue, I continued. Access protocol. We need agreement on how we handle future arrivals. The discussion lasted 2 hours. It was neither smooth nor unanimous. Thomas argued for a hard cap, no more admissions without unanimous consent. Nor pushed back, citing medical ethics and the moral obligation to assist. Lena proposed a middle ground. Any new arrival required majority approval, a health screening, a quarantine period, and a demonstrated contribution to group sustainability. Darius suggested we formalize roles and responsibilities to clarify what contribution meant. Jeanette pointed out that turning people away might create enemies who could return with force. Caleb listened. Near the end, he spoke, his second initiated statement in the group's presence. What if someone shows up who's already bitten? Who's turning? What do we do then? The table went silent. Everyone had thought about it. No one wanted to articulate the answer. We don't let them in, Lena said finally. Her voice was flat. We provide what comfort we can from outside the gate. But we don't open the door. And if it's one of us? Caleb pressed. His eyes moved around the table, landing on each face, demanding honesty. If one of us gets bitten out on a supply run or a fishing trip, what then? Thomas answered his grandson directly. Then that person doesn't come back inside, and the group provides what dignity they can from the other side of the wall. He held Caleb's gaze. Including me, including you. Caleb swallowed, nodded, accepted the compact. We voted on Lena's framework, 6 in favor. Nor abstained, not in disagreement, she clarified, but because she couldn't formally endorse any policy that might require denying medical aid. We recorded the decision in a notebook I'd found in the operations office, our first governing document, written in pencil on lined paper, but no less binding for its humble medium. After the meeting dissolved, I found myself alone in the control room watching the turbine output gauges. 2 machines humming at 60% capacity, sending power into distribution lines that fed empty substations and dead towns. All that energy flowing outward with nowhere to go. Darius appeared in the doorway. You handled that well. I mostly just let everyone talk. That's what handling it well looks like. He leaned against the door frame. Thomas is right, though, about governance. You can defer authority all you want, but people are going to look to you. You're the one who opened the door for all of us. That creates a debt they'll repay with expectation. I don't want that. Doesn't matter what you want. It's what they need. He straightened. Get some sleep, Marcus. I'm starting on the turbine tomorrow. Might be noisy. He left. I sat in the green glow of the monitoring screens and felt the weight of something I hadn't asked for settling onto my shoulders like a yoke I'd built without realizing. One gate code at a time. The first real crisis came on day 23. Not from the infected, from the living. Lena was on observation duty when she spotted them. Not 2 people this time, not 4, 11, a column of figures moving along the service road in broad daylight, approaching the dam with directness that indicated knowledge rather than exploration. They knew where they were going. She radioed down immediately. Marcus, large group incoming, 11 individuals, mixed ages, armed. I count at least 4 long guns. They're on the service road, 20 minutes from the gate. My stomach dropped. 11. More than our entire current population. If they'd heard my broadcast, or if they'd encountered someone who had, they were coming for what we had. The question was whether they intended to ask or take. I gathered everyone in the control room, faces tight, Caleb's hands trembling slightly at his sides. Thomas standing despite Noor's protests about his still healing arm, his posture hardening into something I hadn't seen before. The soldier emerging from the retiree. "We can't take 11 people," Thomas said immediately. "The food math doesn't work, the space doesn't exist, and we don't know who they are or what they've done to survive this long." "We don't turn away 11 people without communication," Noor countered. "Some of them might be children, might be injured, might be dangerous," Lena interrupted. "4 guns minimum, moving in formation. That's not a refugee group, that's organized." "Organized doesn't mean hostile," Darius said. "It means competent. Same thing we are." I raised my hand. The argument stopped. Same protocol as before. Lena and I intercept at the junction. We communicate. We assess. Nobody comes through the gate without group consensus. But we also don't shoot first. Thomas shook his head but didn't argue further. He crossed to the maintenance shop and returned with a pipe wrench, the closest thing to a weapon we had beyond Lena's rifle. "Darius and I will be at the gate, visible but back. Show them there's depth here." I looked at Noor and Jeanette. "Medical station. If anyone needs care, we provide it regardless of admission decision. That's non-negotiable." Noor nodded. "Agreed." We moved. Lena and I descended the service road at a measured pace, not rushing, not hesitating. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd never confronted a group this size. I'd never been in a position where my words might determine whether violence erupted. They reached the junction before we did. 11 people arranged in a loose cluster, 4 men, 5 women, 2 teenagers. Armed, as Lena had noted. Shotguns, a hunting rifle, what appeared to be a crossbow. They were dirty, exhausted, several limping. They'd been traveling hard. The man at the front was massive, 6'4" at least, with a thick beard and shoulders that strained his flannel shirt. He raised one palm when he saw us. The other hand held a shotgun, barrel pointed at the ground. "Hold up," he called. "We're not here to fight." Lena and I stopped 20 yards away, sufficient distance for retreat. Her rifle was slung but accessible. "I'm Marcus," I said. "This is Lena. Who are you?" "Name's Garrett Bryce. We were at Crystal Lake Campground when everything went to hell. Been there 2 weeks, but we're running out of everything. Food, medicine, patience." He gestured behind him. "These are regular people. Families. A couple of college kids who are camping. We've held together, but we need something more permanent." "How did you find this place?" "Your ranger's stationed down the river. We found it abandoned. The radio was still powered. We tuned in and caught a recorded loop from your earlier transmission. Followed the coordinates." The ranger station. I'd assumed its radio was inactive after Noor's group left. But if it had been repeating my broadcast on a loop, automatic retransmission, then my signal hadn't just gone out once. It had been broadcasting continuously to anyone with ears. My mistake. A mistake now standing before me, armed and desperate. "We can't accommodate 11 additional people inside the damn facility," I said directly. No hedging, no false hope. These were adults who deserved clear information, and Garrett's expression didn't change. He'd expected this. "We're not asking for inside. We're asking for proximity, for access to the power, the water, whatever system you've got running up there. We'll build our own shelter. We'll contribute labor, security, whatever you need. But we can't survive at Crystal Lake anymore." "Why not?" Lena asked. A woman behind Garrett stepped forward. Thin, mid-30s, with short cropped hair and a crossbow slung over her shoulder. "Because they found us," she said. 3 nights ago, A group of them came through the campground. 30, maybe 40, just walking through like a migration. We were silent. We were hidden. They passed. But they'll come back. Or more will. The campground is in a natural corridor. Anything moving through this valley passes right through our camp. Lena and I exchanged a glance. This confirmed her earlier concern about the drainage pattern funneling movement. If infected were already traversing the Crystal Lake corridor in groups of 30, that flow would intensify as lowland populations deteriorated and dispersed. "Give us a moment," I said. Lena and I stepped back. She spoke quietly. "If they camp near the dam, they become an early warning buffer. Any threat approaching from the south hits them first." That's a cold calculation. It's a realistic one. But it's not the only factor. She paused. They also become a labor force. 11 people can build fortifications, clear sight lines, maintain a perimeter we can't manage with 7. And some of them might have skills we need. Agriculture, construction, hunting. Thomas will resist this. Thomas is one voice. We agreed on majority rule. We returned to Garrett. "Here's what I can offer," I said. "There's a flat clearing on the reservoir's south bank, approximately 200 yards from the dam building. You can establish a camp there. We'll extend electrical power via the dam's exterior distribution system. Darius, our mechanic, can run a line. We'll share water access from the reservoir filtration system. In exchange, your group participates in perimeter security, labor rotations, and resource gathering." "What about food?" Garrett asked. "We're sustaining ourselves through fishing and forage. We'll share knowledge and access to the reservoir fishery. But we can't provide from our stored supplies. They're already insufficient for our current number." Garrett looked back at his group. Silent communication passed between them, the kind developed through 2 weeks of shared crisis. Heads nodded. The woman with the crossbow gave a single thumbs up. "Done," Garrett said. "We'll start building today if you point us to the clearing." It happened that fast. By sundown on day 23, Clement Dam wasn't a shelter for 7. It was the nucleus of a settlement of 18. Tents went up along the reservoir bank. A fire pit was dug. Garrett's people worked with the desperate efficiency of those who'd been sleeping with one eye open for too long and finally saw the possibility of closing both. Thomas watched from the crest road. When I joined him, his face was unreadable. "You gave them proximity," he said. "I gave them a chance. You gave them leverage. Once they're established, once they've invested labor and claimed space, removing them becomes impossible without force." He turned to me. "I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you've changed the nature of what this place is. It's not a shelter anymore. It's a settlement. And settlements require politics." "I know. Do you?" "Because politics means disagreement, means faction, means conflict. It's gravity, Marcus. You can't wish it away. I'm not wishing anything. I'm making the best decisions I can with incomplete information." Thomas placed his good hand on my shoulder. Brief, firm, almost paternal. "That's all anyone can do. I just hope you're ready for when the best decision isn't good enough." He walked back inside. I stayed on the crest road, watching firelight flicker from the new camp below, and wondered if I'd just built a community or detonated a fuse. By day 26, the settlement had taken shape. Garrett's group, I learned their names over the following days, included a high school woodshop teacher named Paul Okafor, who could build structures from standing timber with hand tools. Within 3 days, he'd directed the construction of 2 lean-to shelters with waterproof tarps and a communal cooking area with a stone fire ring. The camp looked organized, permanent. Darius ran the power line as promised, a 50-meter extension cable from the dam's exterior junction box to the camp, providing enough electricity for lighting and a small heating element. It was minimal, but it transformed their situation from survival camping to something approaching habitation. The woman with the crossbow was named Reina Castille. She'd been a competitive archer before becoming an elementary school art teacher, and she'd adapted her recurve skills to a hunting crossbow with lethal precision. By day 25, she'd taken 4 rabbits from the hillside above the reservoir and was training 2 of the younger members of Garrett's group in silent hunting techniques. I was beginning to see what Thomas meant about politics. On day 26, Garrett approached me at the dam's entrance with a request that wasn't quite a request. "We need access to the interior," he said. "Not living space. I'm talking about the maintenance shop. Paul needs tools to build proper shelters before the weather turns. And the radio. We have people who are missing family, same as everyone. They want to listen, maybe transmit." Each request was reasonable in isolation. Tools could be returned. Radio access saved lives. But each also eroded the boundary between the dam group and the settlement. Every shared resource, every open door, dissolved the distinction between inside and outside that our security depended on. "Tools can be signed out and returned daily," I said. "I'll set up a log. The radio." I paused. "Transmitting is dangerous. My earlier broadcasts are why you're here. Every signal we send tells the world exactly where we are." "Listening only, then, for now. I can allow monitored listening sessions. Nor or I will be present." Garrett accepted without argument. But I saw something in his eyes. Calculation, not malice, but the awareness that he'd asked for 2 things, received both in modified form, and established a precedent for future requests. He was building political capital through reasonable increments. That evening, I found Lena in the control room running her own frequency scan. She looked up when I entered. "We have a problem coming," she said. "Garrett?" "Not him specifically. The dynamic. We're 18 people now with 2 classes, inside and outside. Those with the code and those without it. That disparity breeds resentment, no matter how justified the security rationale." "You think we should share the code?" "Absolutely not. I think we need to reframe the relationship. Stop thinking of them as separate. Start integrating specific individuals into dam operations. Give them investment in the infrastructure rather than dependency on our generosity." "Who?" "Reina. She's disciplined, skilled, and respected in their group. Bring her into the security rotation. Paul, give him formal authority over construction projects. Maybe Garrett himself gets a seat at our decision-making table. Thomas will fight that. Thomas can be outvoted, and frankly, he should be on this one. Integration prevents insurrection. It's basic governance." I stared at the monitoring screens. Turbine output, reservoir levels, gate positions, numbers that behaved predictably according to physics and engineering. Humans followed different laws, messier, less calculable, subject to emotion and ego, and the corrosive influence of fear over time. "I'll propose it at tomorrow's meeting," I said. Lena nodded. Then she added, quietly, "Marcus, you need to stop thinking of this as a burden you're carrying alone. You're not a dam operator managing equipment anymore. You're something else. And that something else requires you to trust people with pieces of what you've built." She was right. And it terrified me more than anything Dead had managed to. Day 28 brought the test I'd been dreading since the walls stopped feeling invincible. It was Caleb who spotted them from the lookout. Not people this time, but a mass of infected moving along the river corridor. Dozens. He radioed down with a voice that cracked only once. "Marcus, there's a lot of them. Coming from downstream. I can't count. Maybe 50. Maybe more. They're slow, but they're all moving the same direction. Upstream. Toward us. Toward the sound of generators and the scent of living bodies and the light that the settlement camp produced every night." I sounded the alert. 3 short blasts on an air horn Garrett had salvaged from a boat trailer. Within 5 minutes, every person in the settlement was awake, armed with whatever they had, assembled in the clearing and waiting for direction. Garrett reached me at the dam gate. "How many?" 50 plus, moving along the river. They'll reach the settlement camp in approximately 2 hours at their current pace. His face hardened. The camp's indefensible. Open ground, no walls, are right on the approach path. "I know. Your people need to evacuate to the dam interior, now." He stared at me. "All 11 of us?" "All 11. This isn't about access politics anymore. This is about keeping everyone alive." He didn't argue. He didn't question. He turned and started shouting orders to his people. Within 20 minutes, 18 humans were inside the dam building with the electromagnetic lock sealed behind them. The corridors were crowded. The air was close with body heat and tension. But we were sealed in concrete and steel. And whatever was coming up that valley would find our walls before they found our flesh. Lena and I took position on the crest road, the one external vantage point we could access without opening the main door. We could see the reservoir, the settlement camp below, and down the valley where the river wound through morning mist. They emerged from that mist like a slow tide, not running, shuffling, stumbling, dragging themselves upstream with the inexorable persistence of water finding its level. 50 was conservative. I counted over 70 before losing track in the density. They moved without formation or purpose, but their combined direction was consistent, upstream, toward noise and light and life. They reached the settlement camp first. Tents were knocked aside. The fire pit was trampled. Paul's carefully constructed shelters were shoved through by bodies that didn't register obstruction, only continued movement. They destroyed 2 weeks of labor in minutes without intention or awareness. Then they continued. Toward the dam, the first ones reached the base of the structure and simply stopped. The concrete wall offered no path upward, no handholds, no gradient they could navigate. They pressed against it, arms reaching upward, jaws working, producing a sound that carried up to where Lena and I stood. A collective moan. Not loud individually, but accumulated into something that vibrated in the chest like a bass note below hearing. "They can't climb," Lena said, confirming what she'd told me weeks ago. Steep terrain defeated them. The dam was effectively a cliff face. "But they're not leaving," I observed. And they weren't. They gathered at the base, pressing against concrete, drawn by the vibration of turbines or the heat signature of the building or some navigation instinct none of us understood. They accumulated. 70 bodies packed against our walls, going nowhere, doing nothing but existing in our shadow. We weren't breached. We weren't even threatened in any immediate sense. But we were pinned. Nobody could exit. Nobody could fish, forage, or access the external camp. We were safe, and we were trapped. 18 people sealed inside a building with 12 days of food. The math hadn't changed, but the context had transformed entirely. 3 days. The horde remained at the dam's base for 3 days. Inside, the atmosphere compressed. 18 people sharing space designed for 4 created friction that physical safety couldn't dissolve. Garrett's people were grateful for the shelter, but anxious about their destroyed camp. Thomas grew increasingly withdrawn. Crowds in confined spaces triggered something in him that he wouldn't name, but that Caleb seemed to recognize and manage by staying close. Nora and Jeanette worked to keep everyone hydrated and calm, rationing food into smaller portions spread across more meals to create the psychological impression of abundance. Darius spent the time at the control room windows, watching the infected mass below and thinking. On day 30, he came to me with an idea. "The tail race," he said. "The water discharge from the turbines. It exits on the downstream face, opposite from where they're gathered. I know the layout. If we increase turbine output, open the wicket gates wider, the discharge velocity increases. The tail race becomes a torrent, loud, violent, visible." I followed his thinking. "You want to draw them around to the downstream face. They follow stimuli, sound, movement, water might register. If we can shift their mass from the upstream access side to the downstream canyon side." "The downstream side has no approach path. It's a sheer drop into the tail race pool." "Exactly. They follow the stimulus, encounter the cliff edge, and either fall or accumulate somewhere they can't affect us. And once the upstream face is clear, we can exit, rebuild, re-establish." It was elegant. It relied on assumptions about infected behavior that we couldn't fully verify, but everything we'd observed suggested they oriented toward the strongest available stimulus without strategic thinking. A massive increase in water noise and movement on the downstream face might override whatever was holding them at the upstream wall. I ran the mechanics. Opening all wicket gates to maximum would increase discharge to levels the tail race was designed to handle. Flood stage protocols. The sound would be enormous. The visual display of water power would be dramatic. If anything could pull a horde of stimulus-driven infected around a concrete wall toward a different face, this could. "We'd need to reduce output afterward," I said. "Running at full discharge long-term wastes reservoir capacity. It only needs to work for an hour, maybe less." I brought it to the group. Lena's eyes lit up. She saw the tactical value immediately. Thomas nodded with grudging respect. Nora asked about risk factors. Garrett leaned forward with the intensity of someone who just heard a path out of a cage. "Do it," he said. "Tonight, before we burn through more food sitting here." I looked around the room. 16 faces, Caleb included, all carrying the same answer in their expressions. Agreement without debate. The first truly unanimous decision we'd made as a combined group. At 10 p.m. on day 30, I entered the control room and initiated full discharge protocol. Wicket gates opened to maximum on both active turbines. The building shuddered as water volume through the penstocks tripled. The sound that came from the downstream face was biblical. A roaring cascade that shook the air and turned the tail race pool into a churning white chaos, visible even in darkness through the reflected glow of our exterior lighting. Lena watched from the crest road. Darius stood beside her. They reported what happened in real time through the radio handset. Movement. They're shifting. The ones at the edges first, peeling off toward the sound. Then, more. The mass is thinning on the upstream face. They're going around, following the base of the structure toward the downstream side. Then, Marcus, it's working. They're falling. The ones that reach the downstream edge, there's no ground. They're going over into the tail race. The current is taking them. 70 bodies, drawn by sound and fury toward a cliff edge that offered no purchase, falling into turbine-powered rapids that churned them downstream and away. By midnight, the upstream face was clear. By morning, we opened the door. Day 31 dawned with the smell of wet concrete and the silence of an empty valley. The horde was gone, dispersed, destroyed, carried downstream by the river's indifferent current. We stood on the crest road in the morning light. 18 people breathing mountain air for the first time in 3 days, and nobody spoke for a full minute. Then Garrett laughed. Just once, a short, sharp exhale of relief that broke the tension like a stone through glass. And others followed. Not celebration, release. The settlement camp was devastated, but not destroyed. Paul's structures had collapsed, but the materials were salvageable. Tent fabric was torn but mendable. The fire pit was scattered but rebuildable. Within hours, reconstruction began, with a focused energy that grief and fear hadn't been able to extinguish. But something had changed. The boundary between inside and outside, between dam group and settlement, had dissolved during those 3 days of shared confinement. We'd breathed the same recycled air, eaten from the same diminishing supplies, and implemented a survival strategy that required every person's cooperation. The political distinction Thomas had warned about was still technically real. I still held the access code, but the emotional geography had flattened. On day 32, I called a meeting. Not 7 people, 18. Every adult crammed into the kitchen with teenagers leaning against walls and door frames. I proposed what Lena had suggested weeks earlier: integration. Raina joined the security rotation. Paul received formal authority over construction. Garrett got a seat at the decision-making table alongside our original group. Thomas voted yes. When I looked at him with surprise, he shrugged his good shoulder. They earned it. 3 days in this box, nobody broke, nobody fought, nobody tried to take more than their share. That's the test I was waiting for. Caleb caught my eye from across the room and gave a small nod. The kind of gesture that said, "We're okay, this is working." Over the following week, the settlement transformed. Paul designed and built a proper perimeter wall around the camp using timber and scavenged materials. Raina established a hunting schedule that supplemented our protein significantly. Darius completed the 3rd turbine repair, bringing Clement Dam to full operational capacity for the first time in over a year. 12 megawatts of power humming through generators that had nowhere specific to send their output. But having capacity meant having options. Jeanette and Noor treated a sprained ankle, a respiratory infection, and an allergic reaction. Minor crises that in another context would have been invisible, but here represented the medical infrastructure functioning. People trusted that if they were hurt, someone with skill would help them. I began teaching Caleb the dam's systems in earnest. He absorbed information with the focused intensity of someone building a purpose from scratch. Within days, he could read the monitoring displays, identify anomalous readings, and perform basic maintenance checks. He was 16 and becoming an engineer, not by choice but by necessity. Though I noticed the necessity was beginning to resemble something closer to desire. On day 37, we received another radio transmission. Not a request for help this time. A voice identifying itself as part of a military coordination effort, requesting locations of surviving civilian groups for potential supply drops and evacuation coordination. I looked around the control room. Lena at the monitoring station. Darius at the generator displays. Caleb in the operator's chair where I'd once sat alone and wept. "Should we respond?" Caleb asked. I considered the question. Transmitting meant revealing ourselves again. But silence meant isolation. And isolation was the thing I'd traveled 63 miles of river to escape. Yes, I said. We respond. Caleb keyed the microphone. This is Clement Dam, Whitmore River watershed. 18 survivors. Infrastructure intact. Power operational. We're here. The static hissed back. Then, copy, Clement Dam. You're on the map. Hold your position. Help is coming. Whether it was true, whether help was real, we couldn't know. But we'd said we existed. We'd declared ourselves to whatever remained of the world, and that was enough to build tomorrow on. I came to this dam alone on day 5 with blistered feet and a chef's knife, and the sound of my neighbor dying lodged behind my eardrums. I came because I knew what a river could give if you understood where it led. But the dam didn't save me. The concrete didn't save me. The turbines and the locks and the walls, they were tools, important tools. But tools require hands, and hands require trust. And trust requires the terrifying decision to let someone else inside the space you've claimed. 18 people live here now. Some of them I chose to admit. Some were thrust upon me by circumstance. Each one of them changed the mathematics of survival and the calculus of risk. Each one of them made this place more fragile and more resilient simultaneously. A paradox I've stopped trying to resolve, because resolution isn't the point. Survival isn't a problem you solve. It's a negotiation you maintain. With the world, with other people, with the version of yourself that emerges when everything non-essential gets stripped away. The river keeps flowing, the turbines keep spinning, and I keep opening the gate. That's the only answer I've found worth holding.